Hey guys, today I'm going to attempt to fix some misconceptions, to change a perspective when it comes to trapping. This largely has to do with snares and baiting technique. Now, most of the videos that we watch here on YouTube have to do with obtaining protein. When we think about survival, we think about trapping it, spearing it, fishing for it, getting that meat, having something we can cook over a campfire. Now, the videos that have to do with plant identification, nuts, fruits, vegetables, things like that, we don't like watching those as much. We tend to lose focus. They're just kind of really vanilla. It's not very fun. But today I want to show you a few things that have to do with fruit trees, not bogging down with the specifics, but things that will definitely improve your chances of getting your hands on that protein. So let's take a quick look at some of the wild types of fruits that you can pick around here at this time. Now, these are desert hackberries. A pretty distinct coloration, very sugary. You eat the whole thing. Back here behind me, this is a Texas persimmon. Black fruits, a little bit larger than a marble. Real pretty, very sweet. You don't want to eat those seeds. Now, what's neat about these, if you look a little higher, you'll see that there's some dehydrated ones up there, and that means that this year has been so amazing when it comes to fruit that the animals, the birds, all the creatures climbing up here eating the fruits haven't been able to strip the trees. And so the fruit is drying on the tree. So if you're in a survival situation, this is just ideal. You just pick all the dried fruits and you have food for later. And that works out really, really well. Now, what we're going to talk about right now has to do with setting your traps. And I'm going to be going over to what's called an aqua tree now. This is my favorite fruit tree in the area, also known as the sandpaper tree. I'm going to show you something to do with trapping. So these are your aqua berries. They're about half the size that we usually find them at, and they're pretty hard to come by right now. The animals have stripped this tree down. That's really what you're looking for, is the most popular fruit tree in the forest. That's what we're underneath right now. Alright, so let's talk about snare placement and baiting technique. This is something that I've seen illustrated in a lot of our survival guides and demonstrated on the survival TV shows, such as they are. Now, a lot of your snares are being set on game trails, and game trails are pretty much pathways through the forest, through the wilderness, high traffic areas, and they can be really handy at times. But the issue comes down to not knowing really what size creature you have walking through the trails. They're used by all different sizes of creature. So if I'm setting a snare for maybe a raccoon or a pig, something that's way down low, and a deer comes through, for starters, the deer is not going to get caught, and secondly, the deer is probably going to knock the snare over because it's not going to be set at the right height or at the right diameter for a deer. So snare placement is key. Now, one of the places I like to put them, oftentimes, is going to be maybe a burrow or a den. And when I find a hole in the ground, at least in most chances or most cases, I know the maximum size of the creature I'm trying to snare. So if I set that snare right outside that den, and the hole's that big, I'm not going to be setting the snare for a creature that size. I'll narrow it down. And that helps out with being able to target the creatures that I'm looking for. Now, on your TV shows, a lot of your guides, I see where they're using bait to attract creatures to the placement of a snare, which is kind of silly. So right now we are below a fruit tree. This is an aqua, also known as a sandpaper tree, and it's one of the most popular fruit trees in the area. And so what I'll see on the TV show is that they'll find a fruit tree, they'll go around and collect the fruit off the tree or collect it off the ground around the tree, and then take it somewhere else to wherever they've set the trap, which is funny. Okay, if you think about it, this tree's been around for maybe decades. It's about 30 foot tall. It's a mature tree, and the creatures that come around to eat that fruit, the creatures that they're trying to trap, they've been coming here every evening, eating the fruit as it becomes ripe, probably for their entire lives. And so they know where the buffet is, they know where the food is. You taking that food far away from where it's going to be expected isn't really going to increase your chances of catching something. In fact, you're probably not going to catch anything because they're not going to be looking somewhere else. They already know where the food is. So what it comes down to is placing your snare in a high traffic area. So if I'm looking for a raccoon, a possum, which is going to be the main critters that are going to be going up this tree every evening, and this is a very, very successful fruit tree. The most raccoons I've ever seen here in one night, coming out here and kind of spotlighting it, was 24. 24 raccoons in a single tree. And if you've ever watched raccoons moving up and down, maybe through a game cam, you know that they do not stop. They'll go up and down, up and down, up and down all night long. So the idea is that if you set a single snare, or if you're smart, you set half a dozen to a dozen snares all over this tree, your chances of catching something are incredibly high. Now, just like maybe a squirrel snare pole, what you'd be doing is setting lots and lots of snares all the way up a pole, hoping that a squirrel runs up it, gets caught, and falls over, and hangs itself. It's kind of morbid or gruesome, but in doing so, you don't have to have a trigger system for your snares. So instead of setting 6 or a dozen different trigger systems on a tree, all I've got to do is set the snare wire out on the end of a branch and set the loop up close to where I know they're going to be traveling. And what that does is that as soon as a raccoon gets caught, or some creature gets caught over here, it starts to thrash, it falls down, and since it's tied up over here on this branch, it hangs itself. And again, that's gruesome, but we're talking survival right now, and we're talking about increasing our chances of getting that creature caught up. Using a wire right here, your material is not going to be infinite. So whether you're using sinew, some kind of woven material, or like me, you use wire, you want to get the most out of each placement you have, and you want to increase those chances, those possibilities. So use your fruit trees, use your nut trees, place your snares wisely, and make sure you get the best out of each one. I guarantee a little bit of practice, a little bit of careful placement, you'll be successful. Let's give you an idea of how this snare needs to be set up. So we've got it set near the trunk, so a creature moving up or down has the best chance of getting caught, either having a paw or a face or head going through the snare. You'll also notice that the wire is trailing all the way out and over onto this branch, and that's in lieu of having a snare trigger. So instead of having something actually trigger off and pull that snare wire tight, the creature getting caught up or tangled over here will start to fall. I'll go ahead and simulate that using this branch. So once the creature's gotten up through there, it falls off and it cinches up just like that, tightens up, and you've got it caught. Again, just like a squirrel snare pole. That's the way it ought to work. Now it's worth mentioning that if you're not trapping or practicing setting your snare traps, that you need to store and stow away your snares so that they're not catching anything, causing things to die or be harmed when you're not around or they're not in use. Now you want to be within the limits of the law, so you want to remain legal. So check your federal and state laws. If you have questions that you're not finding the answer to, go ahead and call up your game wardens. But make sure that you're being ethical and legal in everything you do out there in the outdoors. Well, I'd intended on demonstrating how to set a snare over a burrow hole, but we've been to about half a dozen now, and they're all abandoned. Nobody's home, which is unusual. They're usually inhabited year-round, and many of those for several years now. So coming up to this burrow, it's kind of filling in some of those clues. This has been modified. This has been opened up quite a bit. We've had a young mountain lion move into the area. He's been spotted several times over the last few months, and it looks like this is one of his stopovers. So he'll stay here a couple nights, get some shade, wipe out a lot of the forest creatures in the area, and then move on. And every couple weeks he'll come back and around through this area. So when you start to see burrows that have been abandoned, especially in numbers like we're seeing right now, it's a good indicator that you've got a predator in the area. And this is a good example of where not to set a snare. This here below me is a burrow, and burrows are holes in the ground that creatures live in. Now this one does not look like it's been used in quite some time. They're not normally abandoned, and what that means is that the former occupant was probably eaten. He's no longer alive. Now if this burrow had been well used, well maintained, you'll often see all kinds of fresh and loose dirt out of the entrance. As they excavate more and they do any kind of alterations to the burrow, they'll push the fresh dirt out here, and even the creature moving in and out is going to keep it nice and loose. A lot of times you'll be able to tell what kind of creature is living inside the burrow by the prints that it leaves as it moves in and out. You'll also see that well-used, well-maintained burrows have more of a uniform opening. Nice and circular. This one looks weather-worn, looks like something's actually dug it out since last I seen. And well, all these sticks, all these leaves pretty much are a dead giveaway that nobody's home. Just to give you an idea of what a snare set looks like on a burrow entrance. Now we're going to act like this burrow is much smaller. Having a burrow walled out like this is not ideal. Most of them are going to be just the size of the creature that's living there. Now your snares can overlap a bit. That's alright. We actually want that. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. The size of snare is going to be determined by the size of creature that you have down there. You want something just big enough where maybe the head or nose can get through, and once that neck gets through, it starts to cinch down. That's the idea. Too big and they'll go right through the loop without causing it to trip. Too small and you'll probably just get a paw. And ideally you want to get around the throat, you want to get around the head. You can even add more loops over the top, just kind of nesting them on there. And it doesn't have to look pretty, but it has to work. One last note, a lot of times you're going to have burrow entrances where there aren't any trees, any branches, things like that. What I'll do is I'll lay a log close by and go ahead and tie the snares to the middle. And that way, if the creature gets caught and tries to pull back into the burrow, you've got a log that'll go across and get jammed in, and that works out pretty well. Another piece of advice that I'd like to weigh in on has to do with trail alteration. Now, a lot of your survival guides are going to prompt you to change up your game trails, to pull in all kinds of branches, tree limbs, even trunks and boulders in order to build a funnel, to make sure that that creature doesn't get off path at all, that they go right into your trap, maybe right into your snares. Now in the short term, we're talking a week, several weeks, that's probably going to work against what you're trying to accomplish. Any kinds of changes to the environment are going to be noticed by most of the creatures, especially touching all those things, breaking those branches. You're going to rub off all the essences and the oils, your scent, onto all of those objects. You're going to be working against what you're trying to get done. Now, ideally, you walk up and down that path and you find the perfect areas, perfect natural choke points that you don't have to alter or modify or change at all, and those are going to be your best bet for setting snares. Alright, so take a look at this game trail. Winds all the way back and through the forest back here. And your game trails are your natural pathways that your creatures can use. Now they come in all different sizes, from little runs that your rabbits can go through to huge corridors that your elk can push through. So take a look. We've had a couple inches of rain yesterday. We've already got some traffic on this path. It kind of tells you how many creatures are moving up and down, what types, and a lot of times that'll tell you exactly what kind of trap to set and how lucky you might be with setting that trap. Now we're going to go ahead and end this video off right now, because the next step in learning how to use these kind of runs to snare is an advanced lesson in trigger systems. You're going to have to wait for that one. So guys, tell me what you think. Keep on watching, like, subscribe, and as always, till next time. Alright, so here's the story. This has to do with a mule named Albert that I rode for many years through the mountains. Now we do about 50 miles plus every single week. Up and over the mountains and down through the canyons, some pretty rough terrain. And we wouldn't really touch the same piece of trail twice in 1 week. So all the way around a giant loop, up and over and around, and then the next week we'd do it again. So quite a few miles, lots of scenery, but Albert didn't like any changes. If a tree fell over, even if it was near the trail, if a boulder got shifted or maybe appeared, having rolled down a cliff face and fallen nearby, he would stop and he'd eye it pretty hard. He'd maybe blow and snort at it. He just didn't like anything to change. And you'd think over the course of 50 plus miles that little changes like that wouldn't really occur to him. But they did, and they'd really upset him. Now, on days that he was just going by and going through the motions and get tired, on the notable days, he would get halfway past maybe one of those modifications to the trail before he would realize that it was there. And on those days, he would wake up and he would quite literally jump 10-15 foot straight sideways and then go through his routine of blowing and snorting and trying to figure out exactly what it was and why it was there and why it had changed. So if you don't think creatures, even in a small area, a couple square miles, don't know that things have been messed with, just imagine a discerning mule over the course of 50-60 miles, and just how much of an issue that was when small things were changed. Creatures know. They pay attention. And whenever you mess with stuff, they're aware.